Once upon a time, there was a man named Ozoemena. He was a rich farmer and owned the biggest plantation in the village. His farm was full of yams, cassava, plantains, and juicy fruits. But there was something strange about Brume's plantation. People called it the evil plantation. Whenever someone entered the plantation to steal, something terrible would happen. The person would come out with deep scratches all over their body. At first, the scratches looked small, but after a few hours, they would turn into big painful boils. The person would become very sick, shivering and crying in pain. No medicine worked, no healer could cure them. The only way to get better was to confess and go to Brume's house. When the sick person was brought to Brume, he would listen to their confession. Then he would ask them, "What did you steal?" If the person stole a bunch of plantains, he would ask them to pay the price of the plantains. If it was yams, he would collect money worth the yams. But that was not all. Before treating the person, he would also charge them for the cure. People in the village were confused and afraid. Those who got sick never spoke about it to others. Their families also kept it a secret because they didn't want their loved ones to be called thieves. But every day, people were still sneaking into Brume's house, crying and begging for help. As time passed, the secret of the evil plantation spread throughout the village. Everyone heard about it and became very careful. People no longer went near Brume's farm, no matter how hungry they were. But something else started happening. People stopped buying from Brume too. They didn't want to have anything to do with him or his farm. Brume did not care that the villagers refused to buy from him. He simply loaded his yams, plantains, and cassava onto a car and traveled to a faraway town to sell them. There, people bought his goods happily, and he made even bigger profits. Meanwhile, back in the village, thieves continued to steal from other farms, and soon, every plantation in the village was empty except Brume's. His plantation remained untouched, full of ripe fruits and crops. No one dared to enter, for they feared the strange sickness that followed. The villagers watched in anger, realizing that their boycotts had done nothing to harm Brume. Instead, he was still growing richer, while they suffered from hunger. Jealousy and hatred filled their hearts. They began spreading rumors about Brume. "He must be a ritualist," one woman said. "How else can you explain his farm? He has used a powerful charm to protect it," another man whispered. "He's a wizard," someone else shouted. The people grew angrier and decided to take their complaints to the king. They gathered at the palace and demanded that Brume be banished from the village. "Your Highness, this man is dangerous. He has put an evil charm on his farm," one elder said. "Anyone who enters his plantation gets sick, but he remains healthy and rich. He must be using dark powers," another villager added. The king listened carefully. He had known Brume for many years and had never seen anything evil about him. "I cannot banish a man without proof," the king said. "Brume has always been a good man. If you say his farm is cursed, then he must come and defend himself." The villagers were not satisfied. They insisted that Brume must explain why anyone who entered his plantation became sick. The king finally agreed and sent for Brume. On the day of the hearing, the village square was filled with people. Everyone came to witness what they believed would be Brume's downfall. Those who had once stolen from his farm and suffered the strange sickness stood in the crowd, hoping to see him punished. The elder sat close to the king. watching as Brume walked in, calm and unshaken. The king raised his hand for silence and said, Brume, you have heard what the people are saying. They believe your farm is evil. They want to know why anyone who enters it gets sick. If there is no charm in your plantation, prove it to us today. The crowd murmured, waiting eagerly for Brume's response. Then, Brume took a deep breath, stepped forward, and the village square fell silent as Brume stepped forward to defend himself. The king nodded at him and said, Brume, I have always known you to be a good and humble man. May you be vindicated today. Speak and let the people hear the truth. Brume took a deep breath again, looked around and began his story. A long time ago, I was just like every other farmer in this village. I worked hard, hoping to enjoy the fruits of my labor. But every year, my plantation was invaded. People would steal my yams, plantains, and fruits, leaving me with almost nothing. I never caught the thieves, and I could not punish them. I cried in my heart because I did not want to fight my own people. The villagers listened, some of them lowering their heads in shame. One day, while I was standing in my plantation, an old woman passed by. She saw how sad I was and asked me what was wrong. I told her about my suffering, and she asked me to come to her house later. She said she had something that would stop the thieves from stealing from me. Must filled the crowd. Some nodded in agreement while others looked at him suspiciously. At first, I refused. Brume continued. I told her I did not want to harm anyone, but she assured me it was not harmful. It was only a way to punish those who entered my plantation without permission. So I finally agreed to visit her. Everyone was eager to hear what happened next. When I got to her house, she showed me a special weed. It was a simple plant, but when it touched the skin, it scratched and left deep marks. She told me to plant it all over my farm. Only my family and I knew about it. Gasps filled the air. Some villagers exchanged glances, surprised that the evil plantation was not protected by charms, but by an ordinary plant. So, you mean it was only a weed that caused all the sickness? An elder asked, his voice full of doubt. Yes, Brume replied. That weed caused the scratches, which were later turned to boils. The boils were painful, but they were not deadly. And do you know what the cure was? The crowd leaned in. Ordinary red oil. A loud cry of shock and disbelief erupted from the people. So all this time, it was nothing but red oil that could cure it. One man shouted. Yes, Brume said calmly. I did not use any charm. My plantation was never evil. The only reason my family and I were not affected was because we knew about the plant. Before entering the farm, we always covered ourselves properly so the weeds wouldn't touch our skin. The villagers were stunned. Some of them, especially those who had stolen from Brume, felt both anger and shame. They had suffered for nothing. But some were still not convinced. One of the men who had once stolen from Brume stepped forward and pointed a finger at him. If you say it was just an ordinary plant, then prove it. Let someone go into your plantation now and come out to see if what you are saying is true. The crowd murmured in agreement. Everyone turned to the king, waiting for his decision. The king turned to the crowd and said, to prove whether Brume is telling the truth, 2 men will go into his plantation. One will be well covered, and the other will wear only his normal clothes. When they return, we shall see the truth with our own eyes. The villagers murmured in agreement. 2 men were chosen. With everyone watching, The two men entered Brume's plantation. They walked through the farm, touching the leaves and moving between the crops. After a few minutes, they returned to the village square. When they stepped forward, a loud gasp filled the air. The man, who was not well covered, had scratches all over his arms and legs. The spots where the weed touched him were already turning red, and he was scratching his skin, groaning in pain. But the man, who had covered himself well, stood beside him without a single mark on his body. He looked completely fine. The king nodded and stood up. This proves that Brume was telling the truth. His plantation is not evil, and he used no charms. The sickness was caused by a plant that only punishes those who enter without protection. Brume is innocent. The villagers were ashamed. They had falsely accused a good man out of jealousy. Some of them stepped forward to apologize, but Brume only smiled and shook his head. Then the king raised his hand for silence. From today onward, let it be known that stealing from another person's farm is a great crime. Anyone caught stealing another person's crop will be banished from this village. The people nodded, and from that day, no one dared to steal again. Brume's name was cleared, and he continued to prosper. But now, people respected him and even came to learn from him instead of stealing from his plantation. The lessons we are to learn is that jealousy and false accusations can destroy a person's reputation. It is always better to find out the truth before judging others. Also, stealing is wrong and always has consequences. Hard work and honesty bring true success.
This is Umma's story time. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe. I am Amarachi Ihoma, the young storyteller.